All right, here in the Northern Hemisphere, the days of Advent are the darkest days of the year. And they will be for the next couple weeks. They continue to get darker and darker and darker. It can be sort of depressing time. So it's not surprising that we put up lights, all right, in our yards and in our homes to beat back this darkness. And as Advent continues, as it gets darker and darker, each week we light more and more candles. So it's not surprising then that hope becomes this dominant theme in this season of Advent. Now, we've been telling a story. We started back in September, and we're getting towards the end of it. We started way back on you can see on our timeline here, we started back in September with creation, and in the story, we are right about here, which is sort of the end of what we call this Old Testament. We left off our story last week with a king named Josiah, and he was the best king that they had ever had. After all these terrible, terrible kings who had turned away from God, finally, a king who wanted to make things right. If he had survived, he would have been like a Martin Luther, a great reformer that brought new life to the church. But he didn't survive. If you remember, Judah is this tiny little country there, and it's squished right between two big superpowers, Egypt and Assyria. And they had been for centuries. Israel's already been assimilated by Assyria, and so Judah is left. And there's a third power on the rise called Babylon. Now the Babylonians are pushing out their territory, so they move to the north, and they start attacking Assyria to take over Assyria. And so Assyria had been down there right at the gates of Jerusalem, ready to destroy Jerusalem. But when the Babylonians come at their back door, they retreat back to fight the Babylonians. Egypt sees this going on, and they say, wait a second, my enemy's enemy is my friend. And so, so the Babylonians are attacking Assyria. Let's attack Assyria as well. And maybe we can get some of that territory back. And so, but in order for Egyptians to go to Assyria, they have to go through Judah, right? And so they come and they ask very nicely, come King Josiah, look, no grudge, nothing against you. We simply want to go and beat up the Assyrians. Can we just walk through Judah on our way to Assyria? And Josiah says, over my dead body. The Egyptians say, okay. And so they kill Josiah, and they put one of his sons on the throne. And the son says, no, Dad wouldn't have wanted this, and so they throw him in prison. They say, you got any more sons? Yeah, he's got another brother. This one says, sure, you can go through. And so they go up to help the Babylonians fight Assyria. And the Babylonians they come and they wipe out the Assyrians. And the Egyptians see what's going on, and they say, I don't think we want to be here anymore. So they beat it back to Egypt. And the people, the prophet king that they had set up in Judah has seen what Babylonians have done. And they see how the tide is turning, and they say, I think we're going to switch sides. I think we like the Babylonians now, and we're willing to serve the Babylonians, and if you just don't mess with us. So they said, all right, they'll go through, and they go through, and things go well until the troops leave town, and then they say, well, we really don't want to serve the Babylonians, and the Babylonians come back, and they say, You can't play it both ways. And they say, all right, we're going to, you can serve us, but you have to pay for it. And so they come into the temple, they strip all the gold out of the temple, they empty the treasury, they take 10,000 of the brightest and the best, the leaders, the young people, the craftsmen, they take them all back to Babylon and and they prop up another son of Josiah and say, you can be the king here, but you need to answer to us. Right, so things are not going well. Throughout all this time, Jeremiah has been the prophet. He's on his fifth king since Josiah so far now. And Jeremiah comes to Zedekiah, the king, and says, this isn't just a streak of bad luck. This consequences for sin. You have turned away from God, and God is using the Babylonians to punish it. So you might as well just take your punishment, and then we can get back to life as normal. But Zedekiah doesn't listen to Jeremiah. Instead, he throws Jeremiah in prison for being unpatriotic. He raises up some insurgents. He goes down to Egypt and says, hey, why don't you help us fight the Babylonians? Babylonians finally say, enough is enough. We're not going to deal with this anymore. And they say, we're going to come and just destroy Jerusalem completely. All right? And so they come with their siege engines and everything. They lay siege against Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is easy to defend. That's why it had lasted so long. But it really, they surrounded it so they had no food. A year goes by. There's no food, very little water. Disease is running rampant. And then the Babylonians start to attack, start to break down the walls. And the people inside Jerusalem are fearful because they're at the gates, they're busting on the gates, they tear down the palace, they tear down all the great buildings, pile up the rubble against the gates to try to keep the Babylonians from entering in. They pile up everything they can find. Jeremiah says they're even piling up dead bodies just to create a barrier to keep us from the Babylonians. In the midst of this, Jeremiah has a word to say. He's still in his prison cell. But he sends a word to the king. He says this, the days are surely coming, says the Lord, when I will fulfill the promise that I made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. In those days and at that time, I will cause a righteous branch to spring forth for David, and he will execute justice and righteousness in the land. In those days, Judah will be saved. Jerusalem will live in safety. And this is the name by which it will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. Jeremiah is able to see beyond what's going on. He knows that this is going to go badly, but he says this is not the end of the story. There is hope, even in the midst of the darkness. Last week, went to see a movie that inspired me. Some of you may have seen this movie as well.
It's a beautiful day in this neighborhood, a beautiful day for a neighbor. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? It's a neighborly day in this beauty wood, a neighborly day for a beauty. Would you be mine? Could you be mine?
You want to sing along?
I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you. So let's make the most of this beautiful day. Since we're together, might as well say, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? Won't you please? Won't you please? Please won't you be my neighbor?
Hello, neighbor. All right. So, of course, the movie was Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. If you haven't seen it yet, I really encourage you. Tom Hanks plays this Mr. Rogers, and for me, it is an absolute perfect Advent movie. It's all about light in the darkness. It's about fresh starts, about new beginnings. Now, it's not really a kid's movie, unless it's about the kid that's in each of us, right? That sometimes is afraid or gets angry. I love that we have a Daniel Tiger series, sort of the spirit of Mr. Rogers continuing in our world. But when the series started, it was 50 years ago, last year, the first episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. And it was sort of a dark time for us as a country, 1968. This was the very height of the Vietnam War. We lost 17,000 young men and women from our country. Just that one year, 17,000 were killed. Hundreds of thousands of others in the conflict, the Vietnamese on both sides and the civilians had lost their lives. And our nation back home here was just really severely divided over the war, divided about race. There was an assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Bobby Kennedy was gunned down. The National Guard was called out not to secure the borders, but to quell these riots and protests erupting all over our country. Now, there'd always been dark times in history, but this was the first time that we were able to see it and experience it in our living rooms. Fred Rogers was this guy who said, he was a Presbyterian pastor. I don't know if you know that. He was a Presbyterian minister. But he said, my congregation is not a church on the corner. He says, I want to use this tool, this thing that allows me to go into the living rooms with a message, especially to those who are the most vulnerable. We needed someone like Mr. Rogers. He comes as a calm in the midst of a storm, a light to shine on what is good. Reminds us to value each other, to comfort or confront our fears, and find a way to work through them. Now, Mr. Rogers recorded 900 episodes over the next 30 years. Now, he was targeting the 2 to 5-year-old range, but he was in no way a lightweight kind of thing. He was dealing with really tough subjects. He dealt with divorce and war and things that people were seeing on the TVs, tackling them head on. I've got a few little nuggets of wisdom from Fred Rogers. He didn't preach long things. We have these little bits and pieces. And so here's a little bit of Fred.
It's not so much what we have in this life that matters. It's what we do with what we have. The truth is inside of us, and it's wonderful when we have the courage to
Maybe a
tell
little
it.
volume, a little bit more.
Whether you're first or middle or last, what's important is that you're you, and people can like you just the way you are. Because loving people and animals and the world we all live in is the most important part of being alive. Some of us grow tall and some of us grow short. Some of us have one color skin and some of us have another. That's all outside stuff. But we all have insides, too. And when you like someone, you like being with that person. And it's good to think about the times you'll be together. So when you say goodbye, you think about the next time you will be together. Friends often have hard times and sad times. But friends can come together again and again and build a stronger and stronger friendship between each other. You know, everyone has lots of ways of feeling. And all those ways of feeling are fine. It's what we do with our feelings that matter in this life. Do you like to draw with crayons? I do. But I'm not very good at it. But it doesn't matter. It's just the fun of doing it that's important. In fact, my mother would try to find out who was helping the person who got hurt. Always look for the people who are helping, she'd tell us. You'll always find somebody who's trying to help. And we can always try to remember that we're much more than one thing. Because it does give you a good feeling to know that there's something that you can do to help you become the master of the mad that you feel and not have to hurt yourself or anybody else. And that's true. You're the only person who is exactly like you. So in a way, you've already won in this world because you're the only one who can be you. The important thing for us is to look for what's fine in everybody. And that will help us to want to take care of everybody. And I know how tough it is some days to look with hope and confidence on the months and years ahead. But I would like to tell you what I often told you when you were much younger. I like you just the way you are.
Maybe every day we just have one little nugget from Mr. Rogers. Shortly before his death, he was a commencement speaker at Dartmouth College. The year was, it was 2002, so just a couple months after 9/11. They were still reeling, the country was still reeling from that experience. and he gathered in front of the students, and he said this. He says, when I say it's you I like, I'm talking about that part of you that knows that life is far more than anything you can ever see or hear or touch. That deep part of you that allows you to stand for things that without humankind cannot survive. That love conquers hate. That peace rises triumphant over war. That justice proves itself more powerful than greed. Like the prophet Jeremiah in difficult times, speaking a word of hope. We don't have to resign ourselves to accept the world as it is. We know that it can be better and that we can be a part of that. This season of Advent reminds us of something new, a place that we are journeying towards. Calls us to be a part of this. About 5 years ago, I heard a band. They're out of Eau Claire. They're called 513 Free. Three guys, and a song just really caught my attention, and it's become my official Advent song. I played it for you last year. I'll play it for you next year because I do this every year. The song is called Upside Down.